What's going on, guys? In today's episode, I'm going to be showing you how to make this very simple desk using nothing more than a few pieces of wood, some angle iron for the legs, and besides the drill, you'll only need one power tool, which brings me to the sponsor of this video, Evolution. They've sent me their awesome Rage 3 double bevel sliding compound miter saw to try out for the project, so stay tuned until the end to hear my thoughts on the saw. But what's most fascinating about it is its ability to cut through almost anything you throw its way, which is why we'll be using metal legs. So let's get started with the shopping list and the required tools for the project.
Alright, so what you'll need for the project will be one of these 48 by 17 inch boards, 6 of these 6 foot tall 1x2s, and 4 of these 36 inch long angle iron rods. I'll be using the ones that are about 1 to 1.5 inches wide on each side. Next, you'll need some screws. I'll be using about 25 to 30 of these 2-inch black wood screws and 3 to 5 of these 3/4 inch black wood screws. You'll also need wood glue, various grits of sandpaper, a drill, and a few drill bits, something to finish the wood, which in my case will be a combination of Danish oil and wipe-on poly, and lastly, a miter saw. And I definitely recommend using the Evolution Rage 3, which currently retails for about $200 at your local home goods store. If you don't want to use a miter saw, that's totally fine. You can easily make the cuts with a handsaw and a miter box, but for the metal legs, you'll need something that's meant for cutting metal. Now that we have what we need, let's start the drawing. The size of the desk will be based around the 48 by 17 inch top. Then from the 1x2s, you'll need 3 47 inch long pieces, 2 15.5 inch long pieces, 3 14.5 inch long pieces, and 2 9-inch pieces that have miter cuts. And then the 2 long pieces for the cross brace I'm leaving out because it depends on how tall you make the legs. Then lastly, the angle iron. These need to be cut at a height that fits you and the chair you're going to be sitting in. I'll be making mine 32 inches tall. It will then all come together by making the top brace from 2 of the 47 inch long pieces brought together by 3 of the 14.5 inch long pieces in between. I'll then connect the legs at each corner and then connect them at the bottom with another brace that mimics the top but won't have the front piece, so you need to use the 2 15.5 inch long pieces on the sides to match the width. Then when I get all of that together, I can cut and assemble the cross brace, which can be a little tricky, but I'll show you an easy method. So let's get started on the build. Now unfortunately the saw doesn't come pre-assembled from the package, so to start the project you'll have to put the saw together, but if you follow the instructions carefully it should only take you about 10 minutes to do. So now that the saw is put together, I'm going to start cutting up the 1x2s in the predetermined lengths. So the first issue I found with the saw is the dust collection port isn't sized properly for the hoses I have. I was having trouble finding an adapter that fit. And the motor takes a second or two to turn on, and then if you take your finger off the trigger and want to start the motor back up, you have to wait till it completely comes to a stop in order to turn it back on. And the laser isn't exactly perfect, but it's still accurate enough that you can get a clean cut. So now let's start with the metal. And I definitely recommend wearing gloves and sleeves because it throws little pieces of metal that are pretty hot and you don't want that touching your skin. And also, if you're wearing gloves, it's a little tough to turn the laser pointer off. Now we can start laying out the top brace that will be attached to the underneath side of the tabletop. So I'll take my 47 inch pieces and then in between I'll use my 14.5 inch pieces. And to put them together, I'm going to mark where I'd like to put the holes, and you only need to do one screw. So first pre-drill, and then drive in the screw. It's also a good idea to combine it with glue to give it a little extra strength. Now to hold it together, I'm going to be using clamps, but you can easily just put it up against a wall or have a friend hold it for you. You also want to be sure not to over tighten because you will strip out the holes since this is pine. Now I'm going to attach the brace to the top. I'm just going to drill a hole for reference and then mark where the brace is going to be, because then I'm going to take the brace off and put a line of glue where it overlaps. Be sure not to overuse the glue because it will squeeze out and make a mess. Now put the brace back on the top and drive in the screw. Next I'm going to start making more holes and drive more screws in. Be sure to make about 5 to maybe 7 of these. After that, you're ready to move on to the bottom brace. This will be done almost identical to the top brace, but where the pieces connect, you're going to make 2 holes just to give it a little more rigidity. And it's also a good idea to hold it in place with a square, just so they line up correctly. And just do that for both sides, and the bottom brace is almost done. Next, I'll be making those 45-degree angle cuts on the 9-inch angle braces. And these are going to be 9 inches on the longer side. And they're just going to require 2 screw holes on the ends. So for this, just use the 3/4 inch screws instead of the 2-inch screws, and make sure the angle is square before you drive these in. Just add a little bit of glue, hold it in place, and then screw them in, making sure not to over tighten them because it will shift on you, so make sure you hold it in place very tightly. And now we're ready to connect the legs, but first, before we do that, we need to round off the corners because the interior side of these angle iron pieces are rounded over just a little bit. So now that fits a lot better, we can drive them in. So first, mark the hole, making sure not to hit the other screw that's already in the wood. And to make the cut, you're going to want to use a little bit of oil. You can use any type of cutting oil. This stuff is pretty cheap and you can find pretty much anywhere. And make sure you use a drill bit that's the same size as a screw, and then use a much larger drill bit to countersink the holes, making sure you only go about 1/4 of the way through, not too deep, and then just drive in the screw. After you do all 4 corners, lay it down on its back and then put in the bottom brace so we can start sizing up what we'll need for the cross brace. To do this, just lay down one of the remaining 6-foot long 1x2s, mark where it is, and it's going to be about 55 degrees. Unfortunately, the saw only goes to 46 degrees, so we'll need to make this cut by hand and then sand it, and you should be fine. And for the bottom part, I'm actually going to raise the foot just slightly, about 1/4 inch. So then mark where the top of the bottom brace will go, and then that cross brace will need a corner cut. And you can easily do this with your miter saw. Just make 2 cuts and then line it back up to see if you got it right. It might take a little bit of trial and error, but you will get it. It's very easy. Now for the overlap. To do this, just mark where they overlap and we'll be able to make what's called a half lap joint. To do that, mark where the halfway point is on your piece of wood, screw down to stop so the blade only touches the halfway point. Then just line up the laser sight and start making the cuts. But before that, you might want to put a couple pieces behind the piece of wood because the saw can only go back so far. And then after that, just make the opposing cut on the other piece and then line them back up. Now I'm going to start attaching the foot brace to the metal rods the same way I attached the top brace, by drilling the hole, countersinking, and then driving in the screw. Now you can sand the bottom of these with sandpaper. It'll take a while, so I'm going to speed it up and use a rotary tool. Again, this is not required. You can easily do it with sandpaper and a little bit of elbow grease. Now I can attach the cross braces with the top. And to do that, just mark where you'd like the screw to go and then start gluing up your joints, making sure not to overdo it because it will leak out. And if it does leak out a little bit, it's okay, just clean it up. It's also a good idea to clamp together where the 2 braces meet to hold them in place. Next, just pre-drill where you'd like the screw to go and then drive it in. And after doing that on the other side, you can connect the cross braces where they meet in the middle with a 3/4 inch screw, making sure you drill in from the back side. Now you can attach where the cross braces meet at the bottom. Using the same method, just drill through the metal with the same size drill bit as the screw, countersink, and then drill it in. And after the project is all built, make sure you clean up any wet glue you find, let that dry for about 10 minutes, and then give it a really good sanding with about 200 grit, making sure you don't eat through any of the pine because it is a little bit soft. And just round over corners, get rid of any sharp edges you find, and then start laying down your coat of whatever stain you'd like to use. And once that dries, you can put on your polyurethane or polyacrylic or whatever finish you choose, making sure you sand with about 300 grit in between each coat so it gives it a really nice finish.
Now in terms of how sturdy the desk is, it's actually really nice. So movement back and forth is almost absolutely taken care of thanks to this cross brace underneath, as well as the addition of the foot brace. In terms of movement this way, it could be a little better. It's pretty much gone, but since it's up against a wall, that's not something you have to worry about. If it's floating in the middle of a room and you're constantly going back and forth for some reason, I would probably look into putting cross braces on the sides, but for the most part, it's rock solid. Alright, so now that the project is complete, I'll give you my 2 cents on the saw, and honestly, it's not bad. It performed great, and it's really nice, and I highly recommend it for the weekend workshop enthusiast, but if you're looking for something with a lot more accuracy, and it's a lot more refined, you're going to have to move up to a higher price range. But besides some of the little annoyances shown earlier, it did a great job, so thank you Evolution for sending me this saw. It made the project an absolute breeze. But until next time, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, like and share the video, and let me know in the comments what you thought of the project or the saw. And if you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out either in the comments, through Instagram, or even Facebook. So thank you again for watching. I will see you next time.